Hello, everyone, and happy belated Icepick Day, at least for you guys, as we're recording this. It is August 21st, which means a certain revolutionary, for certain perpetual revolutionary, met his fate with an ice pick this day 40 years ago. And with that out of the way, we will continue into the news of the week. It's going to be a bit of a shorter episode. We, of course, had our very successful interview with Vile Varangian up earlier this week on Monday. You guys really seem to like that, so again, we're going to try to bring him on every once in a while, get updates from that neck of the woods. But for starters, Germany is planning on disbanding their special forces yet again. Now, this has been a perennial fight ever since the migrant crisis in 2015. Off the top of my head, I believe it's the KSK Special Forces, but point being is, it's the most elite units of their military. And, of course, they're always accused of being far right extremists, because the kind of people who ascend that sort of rank and that sort of skill within pretty much any military organization, any country, are usually on the more right wing side. And of course, with the rising of the migrant crisis, there were low level so called plots for coups against the German government to restore order and stop the flow of refugees and migrants into the country. This a lot of it was played up, but those sentiments definitely existed. They just were looking for a reason to purge any dissent at all. It was one of those situations. We've seen it time and time again in the U.S., especially recently with, I think there was that one case of the guy who was in the Air Force and he was allegedly plotting something. But these things happen every once in a while. But Germany has never managed to completely disband the KSK, and this is becoming an issue again. Now, what's also interesting to note about Germany is at a bit of a crossroads in many ways. So, number one, you have Merkel with her last year in office because she said that she will not stand for election again in 2021 and step down as leader of the so called Christian Democratic Party, which is supposedly a center right party in Germany, and would hand the reins over to someone else. So you have a possible change in leadership with somebody who's been in power as long as Merkel. I think she's up there to almost 20 years already. I don't know off the top of my head, but you have that. And then you have, of course, the conflicts within NATO and the European Union, especially NATO, the spat between Germany and the United States, the removal of troops. And to top all of that off, you have the energy wars that are going on, where Germany wants to partake in Nord Stream 2 and other Russian energy projects, while the United States is threatening them with sanctions. You have, hell, the appointment of a new ambassador to Germany underway right now. Now, I don't think McGregor has had his hearings yet, but point being is, the United States will have a new ambassador to Germany at some point, whether it's Douglas McGregor or whether it's somebody else. So that's another major change. One of the representatives from the United States who, again, calls the shots in Germany. Germany's probably the primary example of a modern colonized country today. And you have all that on top of that. And I think the liberal elite in Germany is trying to do one last push to placate the population. Now, am I saying the AFD would win every election in 2021 if they didn't do this? No, but I do think the liberals want to flex their muscles and show we still have the power to put you down when we want to. That's my take on this, at least.
hmm And interestingly enough, those close to Merkel, and including liberals, uh, are still mostly in favor of Nord Stream 2, which would like basically double the capacity and double the earnings for Russia. Merkel is still, basically popular in Germany, if maybe not always enthusiastically. I think Germany feels there is no alternative. And, she has been in power for 20 years. And, she's looked at as a kind of stable guiding force. For me, I think what'll be interesting is how developments will will go on between Turkey and America, especially over Nord Stream 2. Now, obviously, removing the troops was a signal. I think it's not very serious. Removing 12,000 troops is not that big of a deal.
Well, I
It's
think
not
where
going
they're
to
going is
pass.
more of a big deal than the fact that they're leaving Germany.
Right, right. Yes, that's true. But what you get in the newspapers, and this is what causes one to have to read through the lines, and that is, sorry, between the lines, and that is, they'll say they're going to go to Poland, they did Italy, and some of them will be going back to the U.S., maybe a few Baltic states, and so on. I mean, that's all par for the course if we're looking at what NATO's long-term project is with Russia. So I'm sure Merkel knows that already, right? It's not the 80s anymore, and it's not even maybe the 90s or the early 2000s. So I think she expects it. I think that action in many ways was something that was convenient for the US. It was something that, like, of course, you know by total coincidence, there's stuff going on in Belarus, and Americans have moved 1,000 troops into Poland. And by the way, they don't have to obey Polish law. That I just read that today. So I think basically what this is about is it's going to be a strong arm tactic on Germany, and to see if Germany complies. My only beef with it is the cynicism of America for waiting, after 93% of the pipes that were laid down for Nord Stream 2, and then to like introduce the sanctions in a way that, like, it's so cynical, it's so punishing to all the companies that were involved, that it's sure to create a certain kind of strife, and or a resentment. Now, I think I don't know how cash strapped it is, but they've laid down a few more. I think we're nearing like 95 or 96% complete. So it'll be interesting to see what happens once it's complete. On the other hand, what can America really do? You know, okay, Germany is going to get this gas, and by proxy, so will France. France wants it as well. And so will Switzerland, and so will Austria, and so will lots of countries. Yeah, Poland won't, right? And Ukraine won't, but you know they're in another trajectory, right? They're part of a new global strategy against Russia. So I think I guess to sum it up, I think they have to. I think they have to sort of play tough right now with Germany. But I think the pipeline is eventually going to get completed, and often we've talked about this on the show, that there's going to be a kind of two-tier version of the EU, and the EU in the East will not be like the EU in the West. There'll be some differences because they'll have different objectives.
It will become with the EU. You have an interesting situation where they moved more and more towards federalization, and Brexit, even with as botched as was, dispelled a lot of notions about what the European Union was, is, and could be, to the point where they had to start making concessions to these countries that were having their own uprisings, such as Poland, such as Hungary. I would say more so Poland and particularly the Baltic states in this case, but they had to sweeten the pot. They had to give them a reason to stay. Now, at first, they tried the very harsh route of punishment and fines, especially with Poland, with Germany really cracking down on them. But then they eased up and decided they were going to play coy with them. They were going to be like, look, you can stay. You don't have to take in the migrants. You can get all the welfare benefits you want, but please just stay in the European Union. So you have this
Mhm.
you have this rapid move towards centralization, and now they are, I would say they've completely given up on it, but they've just completely changed direction to the point where they're more concerned with preserving the existing union than centralizing it more or expanding it. And in terms of expanding it, we've seen this in the Balkans where they've been reluctant to admit countries like Albania. So, I
Right.
like that was one of Macron's big things where he was really trying to bring Serbia into the fold and didn't want to bring Albania or I think it was Montenegro also at the same time. So the EU is forced to make some tactical retreats, as I would call them. And you bring up with the gas exports, with someone like McGregor possibly being the American ambassador. If that happens, we could see a bit of softening of U.S. policy. But one thing also to consider in terms of just the gas exports in general, I think it's either the 2018 or 2019 figures. I don't know off the top of my head, but they're the most recent figures out that natural gas, uh, accounts for about like 6% of Russian exports.
Right. It's not that much, and I think that surprises a lot of people. But the other thing is that, and this is going to be a shock for a lot of people, but Germany is the largest burner of coal in Germany, and they have a project to green up, and that ultimately means buying natural gas instead of coal. Um, so basically, but that's not America's beef with it. America basically wants Germany to buy its natural gas rather than Germany's natural gas. And as of today, Russia is now back in second place for the largest exporter of oil, surpassing Saudi Arabia, which is something we predicted that it would do, because of the reserves it had been accumulating into several hundred billion, in preparation for that showdown that we saw. So that's an interesting development.
Yeah, there is that, and there's like I said at the beginning, the best way I could put it is they're at a crossroads in many different ways, and
Mm.
I do think we could also interpret this move with the KSK as sort of another acquiescence that we need to be more aligned on a communal defense structure, whether that be NATO, whether it be a quote unquote European army, and while they're disbanding the best of their best military forces. And keep in mind, this is a country we're talking about with 4 combat-ready fighter jets. Germany, again, while it has a great industrial potential, while it has great military potential, has been effectively neutered since the end of World War II, and they haven't lived up to that. I mean, it's not like they could without facing major repercussions from the rest of the world because of
Yeah,
even being 80 years ago, World War II, like 75, 80 years ago, the how fresh it is in the memories, and again, that has to do with the constant reinforcement of it. But point being is, uh, anytime Germany would take any quote unquote aggressive actions, you'd hear shrieks about World War One and World War Two all
yeah,
over again. So it's a country that again has been effectively neutered in almost every way, and it has to tread lightly because of that.
yeah. And it's an ironic relationship, right? Like, you're right. Germany has experienced this before in the past, where Europe and other powers, or the Anglo powers, have neutered it. But at the same time, there's two or three things that I would say. And so one of them is Germany is without doubt the most anti-American country in the EU, without question. Number two, they're still the most talented country in the EU, especially when developing military hardware.
Yes.
And I would say France is a very, like, with respect to Europe. I'm not including America, although in some areas, especially like tank development, yeah, Germany's superior to everyone in the EU, not just France. That includes America. And so there's lots of things, and of course, it's the Eurofighter. It was jointly developed with them, so they can do it. Of course, they're hamstrung. They can't have, they can't do too much, right? And but I think Germany kind of sees that, like, um, it understands Russia is not a threat to its sovereignty, right? It knows that very, very well, and there's no way for basically America to kind of fool them into thinking that it does. Basically, what it does is it spoils, America's long-term plans for the EU and long-term plans against Russia. That's all it does.
Yeah, as far
And
as
that's really,
Germany's concerned, the only interest they have in terms of Russia and by extension the former Soviet Union is they want that Ukrainian farmland, which I mean they've pretty much already gotten, but
yeah,
beyond that, it's not really anything. And in fact, their vision is a more integrated Russia. Now, again, of course, they would want a liberalized integrated Russia, but an integrated Russia no less, whereas you see the Anglo-American perspective now is pretty much complete submission, if not dismantlement.
Right, right. They want, they want sort of the gay capitalism, the crazy white woman capitalism. Uh, in other words, what am I talking about? So I'm talking about, like basically the Ponzi scheme that is the American economy, right? So you want lots of debt and lots of printing of money, and this is a tough situation because Germany is not like, I mean, Germany has debts, yes, but it's not in Germany's character to have a bloating debt that then you try to turn into an economy, right? Um, that is how America is surviving right now, right? By printing more money and basically increasing more debt. And one of the reasons why they want more migrants and immigrants and refugees is because they're more likely to be in debt. And so they need to keep this going. And, Germany is expected, all of the EU is expected to go along with that. So, but again, you see developments like China and Russia where the economies are becoming more insular and where debt is kept lower. So, um, it'll be interesting to see how, like, what kind of game plan Germany has for the future. Like, yes, Deutsche Bank is probably in very big trouble. So I'm hesitant to say what will happen, within the next year or
Oh
the
no,
next
oh
six
no. Remember
months.
what happened last time the banks were in trouble and Germany was a major player on the world stage?
Uh, yes, that's
I'm
right.
clearly
Oh,
referring to
no.
the 1870s, you anti Semites.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, but I don't think. I mean, even with Deutsche Bank, like I say, they're very talented people. They're probably the most talented people in Europe, and they'll be fine. They'll make it out of this. I have no doubt.
Yeah, again, because if they go down, it's going to cause a chain reaction, and to the point where they cannot fail. And
Yeah.
even, like I said, even if they were about to, I would say structurally they're in a position where they cannot fail, at least for the short term. Now, I think it would take a major economic crisis on the scale of the Great Depression, which who knows what the next couple years hold with COVID and the economic fallout from that, but
Mhm.
at least in my personal opinion, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But look, we've been greeted with bigger surprise before, and surprises about that magnitude. I wouldn't expect us to be talking about half the things we're talking about today, right now, a year ago. But I suppose that wraps up that. And just as an aside, we're definitely gonna have to do a special episode at some point, particularly on the debt crisis in Southern Europe and how these
Mhm.
countries are, especially after COVID, especially Italy, Greece, Spain, are pretty much in economic state of disrepair from this point on.
Yeah.
But with that out of the
It's
way,
There'll be
let's.
even more people than to Germany. So.
Oh yeah. But with that out of the way, let's move on to Belarus. And you told me you had something. You were doing some a little bit of a deep dive into this. So I'll hand the reins over to you for the next couple minutes.
Okay, well, before I get into all the players that are involved, we'll go through that. But several things occurred to me looking at what's happening in Belarus. Of course, when Maidan was occurring, and I would say even before the end of 2015, I was watching different channels. In Russia that were dealing with these are YouTube channels that were dealing with, well, what about Belarus? And there were some analysts that were very, very afraid about what could happen there, and they took it quite seriously. Now, one of the things that occurred to me is I decided to draw parallels with what has happened in Belarus and what has happened in Ukraine. And I fully understand that for Russia, from a spiritual point of view, Crimea is important because that's where the first, kings were baptized. That's when the Rus adopted Christianity and so on. Of course, it's also a naval base, Sevastopol, right? Like, This has had an importance to Russians and the root and the greater body of the Rus for a very long time, for at least 1,000 years. So, but to get back to Ukraine, so one of the things that stood out for me that I saw a marked difference between Belarus and Ukraine is when the protests were going on in Maidan, and of course there had been other protests that occurred during the Orange Revolution in 2008. But that will only strengthen the point that I'm just working on getting to, and that is, you notice that McCain showed up, Henri Levy showed up, the great quote unquote conservative French Jewish intellectual, fighting for democracy around the world. I mean, he's a Zionist, basically. So
So,
he's a French
Yorham
Zionist.
Hazoni before Yazoni, or Hazoni, or whatever the hell his name is. That you know the
Yeah,
guy I'm
yeah.
talking about. But
But Levy thinks that he's a French film star, so his shirt is always unbuttoned. It doesn't matter how cold it is. I see him getting older. I see him getting punchier, and he has buttoned up one button higher than normal.
oh, one of those
Uh,
smarmy
yeah, yeah.
types.
So
Ugh.
so McCain is there, Kagan is there, Noodleman is there. They're all there. All the players are there. Biden is there. Kerry is there, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, how are all these people showing up in Ukraine with Yanukovych in power? I mean, of course, Western media will always talk about Yanukovych and Lukashenko as if they're Putin's puppets, but truly, like, Ukraine is now a puppet state of the U.S. Like, they're not comparable at all. Russia could never tell Ukraine, you have to teach Russian only, and you must close your borders with Poland. But the reverse is happening with American church. But I digress. So all these players are there, and you don't see that happening with Lukashenko. Now, does that mean that Lukashenko is on Putin's side? No, not really, because he made a deal with the Americans for oil, which was a blow. Not just financially, but in the kind of brotherly connection that they have with Russia as well. It was symbolic, and of course, Lukashenko's an idiot because he wants to play both sides, and his country really doesn't have the power, the clout to do it. In any case, he didn't allow. No, no. Henri Levy is in Lithuania. He is with what's her name? It's honestly not that easy to pronounce it. It's Tikhanovskaya. So Tikhanovskaya is the familiar face, the brunette woman that you've seen by now,
The
and she's in
Belarusian
Lithuania.
wine mom.
Yes, yes, yes. They also visited Albania. Like, go
Oh,
Albania.
joy.
Like, they're completely bought out, right? Like, that if you're wearing like Albania stuff and Henri Levy is meeting with you and Macron is praising you, yes, you are in global homo.
Let me
So,
also just say, if you can go to Albania without losing a kidney, you have sold out.
yes. So all these actors, of course, are showing up in Lithuania. None of them dare enter Belarus, and I don't think it's necessarily because there's Russian troops there. Well, there were Russian troops in Ukraine as well. So they're taking the chances. And so, my idea is this, that the Kremlin and Putin basically had figured out that, Ukraine would be a state that they would inevitably lose. And essentially, Yanukovych allowed these players to come in because the fact that McCain and Kerry and all these guys would go there and give speeches absolutely strengthened the resolve of the Ukrainians who were protesting. Many of those Ukrainians, some say most, were shipped from Western Ukraine into Kiev to protest there. And it was this that encouraged them to basically continue protesting.
So you're telling me they're shipped in from Canada?
Well, I'm very sure there were some Canadians there as well, some Ukrainian Canadians, right?
Oh, I mean,
So
would it be a Ukrainian movement if there wasn't?
yeah, that's right. So I guess what I'm getting at is I personally think that Yanukovych intentionally let them come in. And the point of it was to get the Americans to make a misstep based on their hubris. They knew what would be the result, that it would only encourage the protesters. They knew that that would incite them to commit more violence and to stand up to the police and so on, and to just generally raise the stakes. But what this did in the process, as it heightened the violence, especially when shooting began going on, and there were snipers from different buildings, and cops were getting killed, and protesters were getting killed, and people couldn't figure out where are these shots coming from. Of course, this is sort of the latch door, like, as soon as one person throws a stone, everyone else can. So this kind of chaos develops, a kind of all versus all, so to speak, because it's uncertain who is targeting who. So as that goes on and violence starts to mount against those identifying as Russians or Russian speakers, or who don't want to be a part of the EU and NATO, Putin has a pretext to go into Crimea. Because ultimately what you want, if you're Russia, is Crimea. That's the most important thing. It's easy to defend, and it's more important than the rest of Ukraine. I think after the Orange Revolution, I think they knew that basically they would not be able to withstand against pressures from the West, and that Ukraine would eventually slip. But how to hold on to what was most important when it wasn't yours, right? How do you get it back? And so I say this because none of those manifestations that we saw happen in Ukraine have happened in Belarus. Yes, you could say that the West is more hesitant about it. You could say that maybe Russia is in a stronger position than it was then. It was more uncertain. There could be lots of reasons, but at the end of the day, Lukashenko is not allowing them to step foot, and that's a very big difference. Like, if you take out the fact that Yanukovych, like if you take out what Yanukovych did, which was allow all these foreigners, leaders of states, diplomats, to come in and encourage the protests. You take that out of it, then what Putin does is basically he got lucky, or he just made the right guess. It was a gamble. It worked out. But if you understand what was it, because Yanukovych could have barred all of them. There's no reason why he didn't do that. So I don't know what's in store exactly for Belarus, but I see this that Lukashenko is doing is actually really important. He's not allowing them in, and so it doesn't mean he didn't screw up. He did, of course. It doesn't mean he wasn't trying to play both sides. But I think probably that he doesn't want. How can I put it? He doesn't want his legacy tarnished. He doesn't. I think he understands that he has to leave power, and and this is where I think the question with Russia comes in. Russia absolutely knows that he's got to go, right? But who do you align yourself with? And so far, um, there is we have three women who are part of this movement. Very gay, GHEY. Now, the other
Well,
woman.
I ask you show some respect to the Wynant Brigade.
Yeah, yes, of course. So there's another woman, Kolesnikova. So Kolesnikova um, has basically guaranteed Putin and Belarusians that they will not give up on their on the agreements, on their economic agreements, and on their military alliance agreements with Russia. This is the CTSO. Now, as far as I know, Kolesnikova is still in Belarus, but I'm just trying to remember her how to pronounce her name. I mean, what a bad Slav. Um, it is a tricky one for me. Tishanos Tikhanovskaya.
Huh? What do you say? Is it's
Ti-
as if
ti-
it's a foreign name made to sound more Slavic? Who would do that?
well, yeah, no. You know what? You know what it is? It's like in Slavic languages, like her name basically means like silence. So ticha or ticha is silence, but um, we say it slightly differently. We say it with the sh sound, and it's messing me up. I want to say it the way I would say it in
So your
Macedonian
South
instead of
Slavic's coming out, is what you're telling me.
yes. So I keep trying to. I have to stop myself from mispronouncing it.
Well, I think the
So
biggest takeaway from this is it's a shame she doesn't take after her name and remain silent.
yes. Now, she also, I mean, the Atlantic Council even, of course, suggested that Belarus will not exit the EEC or the CSTO. But when you go to her website, Tikhanovskaya, when you go to Tikhanovskaya's website, actually, the demands are there in Belarusian saying, like, yeah, you have to leave these. And you have to de-Russify yourself. You have to ban Russian as a language. You have to close the borders. You have to be part of the EU and NATO, and so on and so on and so on. You can just hear we're going to have to take care of the corruption, which means like the IMF is going to have to come in. They're going to buy everything. They're going to turn your women into prostitutes. Like it's like
It's like the wrong corrupt guys are in power. We need our corrupt guys in power. What's wrong with you?
see, this is what I mean. Like they're all you gotta get your mafia boss, not someone else's mafia boss. So and that's what gives mafia bosses their clout, right? Because
Look,
they're like,
let me just tell you this. You know, it's a common saying that's only a war crime if you lose. It's only
yeah,
corruption if you're ineffective.
right, right. So so I find that interesting. That so there's a double speak there. Some other interesting developments for the first time, and this is these protests have been going on for about 2 weeks now. Today, the first EU flags have shown up. Just two of them. There was a video footage of a man complaining, like, "Why are you showing them here? Like, they're not part of, like, they're not Belarusian. Like, why are you doing that, right?" And I think that's basically a sign. That's a sign. Now, the other thing is there's been agreement between Macron and Putin to have mediations, to have discussions on what to do next. Putin has made it clear for them not to involve themselves, to intervene in any way with Belarus. Of course, Europe cannot help but start delivering the sanctions in Belarus until they can turn the people against, their better selves, not just against Lukashenko, in order to be with the EU. So the OSCE is going to be monitoring that, which it's not a great institution, but what else is there? So that'll be interesting to see how that develops. So that's my deep dive. That's my takeaway on. I'm sure like the listeners out there will probably be able to go much further than me. I'm just putting that out there that for me it makes no sense what Yanukovych did. I can understand Yanukovych was afraid. Uh, you know, oh my God, I've got another revolution. I just had an orange revolution. Like what was it, 6 years ago? Now there's another one. I get it. He could have been afraid, but he had to have known. There's no way to. You don't appease the people by bringing in the very people who are there to topple you. And none of that happened in Belarus. And that marked difference is something I think that we should pay attention to.
Oh, absolutely. And just to expand a little bit on what you were saying about Ukraine, I do think that Putin does have a degree of foresight, and I do think that's a very lost thing in politics now. Because early on, of course, we all remember the 4D chess memes about Trump. But point being is, people have become so desperate for any sort of long-term thinking, that just forward thinking or having a long-term plan is interpreted as 4D chess by anyone. So, like when somebody when you say,
Yeah.
oh, maybe Putin thought a few years down the road instead of just until the next election, if you're like, oh, you're just coping 4D chess, etc. It's like, no, when you actually have politicians who aren't constrained by at least the modern understanding of democracy and liberalism, I'd say in general, they are able to think long term. They are able to make plans maybe for a decade or two down the road. And I think it's very plausible that Putin probably saw the direction that things were going in Ukraine. Yanukovych wanted to rub elbows with the Western elite, and he took inventory, decided what do we really need? What's really vital? And that turned out to be Crimea and some parts of eastern Ukraine, which we have the groups like the Donbass fighting and everything. We have the groups in the Donbass fighting and everything. And he was willing to make those sort of sacrifices if it meant for, again, as you told me last night, it was the quote unquote queen sacrifice in a game of chess. Now, I don't know if I necessarily call it a queen, but again, the analogy stands that you were willing to give up something valuable in order to preserve something vital.
Yes, I think. Well, you put it very well there. Yeah, yeah. So I think that but again, I said it before. I don't want to repeat myself. I said it in the last show that I could see that if Belarus falls, the next step will be Kaliningrad. Now, Kaliningrad, you can't just bring in democracy because it's literally just military families. So it's filled with military. That's going to be a hard nut to crack. However, if you force Belarus to close its borders
Yeah, if you can
and
isolate it.
remove the Russian, then there's no land travel back and forth for Russian troops between Belarus and Kaliningrad vis-a-vis Poland and Lithuania.
Yeah, that is the probably most
So it is a big deal, and
yeah.
it is, and and it is like it is a moral defeat, right? It is a moral defeat, and I would say that you could argue that the Russian economy was probably better like 8 years ago than it is now. That it took a hit, it's bounced back, but it's not at levels where I think a lot of Russians would wish it were. And we still have to see what kind of fallout there's going to be after COVID. So, that mix of like a small defeat can look like a big defeat when there's something else that's gloomy and looming on the citizen's mind.
Yeah, definitely. And it like you said, maybe economically it was better. And as we were talking about earlier off air, that Ukraine's GDP per capita has gone up, but how much of that is actually an increase in standard of living versus the elite of Ukraine becoming richer because they've been introduced to Western capital? And that's also another point you can make about Ukraine, that it becoming a basket case is arguably better for Russia's narrative than Ukraine staying as a semi-functional state within Russia's orbit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I still see average like discussions back and forth, arguments back and forth on Twitter between you know Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians about Ukraine's a mess. What are you talking about? Or we don't want that to happen here, and so on and so on. So it still seems to be, from what I can gather, sort of a virtual kind of man on the ground perspective. I realize how limited that is, but it does still seem to be that for the average Ukrainian, things are still pretty bad. The other thing is reunification. Now, Yanukovych has asked for reunification, or rather reunification with Russia,
I
and
believe you mean
this is a really
Lukashenko. You said Yanukovych there.
sorry.
What's the difference, honestly?
You know
It's
who's
just that
really calling all the
Lukashenko.
shots?
Yeah,
You know who's really calling all the shots?
Putler.
Yeah, it's Yanukovych
Oh
in
wow.
Russia. Yeah, yeah. So uh, now I've read articles that say that Russia has forestalled on this, and then there's accusation that it was really Belarus. Honestly, I don't know which one to believe. I'm probably more likely to believe that Russia has forestalled on it, but it is something that has been kicked down the road since 1994. And so there was a recent survey about like who would like to rejoin Russia, and basically, if you're 60 and over, there's 62 or 63% of you that would like to rejoin. If you're between like 20 and 35, it's 50% would like to rejoin. So there's an opportunity, but it's fading,
Wow,
right?
that's even still pretty
Depend.
high among the youth. I would have expected lower, like the 25
No,
to
it's
35.
it was like 50.3%.
Yeah, like
It is. I'm surprised too. It's higher than I thought.
yeah. Uh, but again, as I say time and time again on the show, it's a now or never moment for quite literally everyone involved in the situation. And carrying on the same theme of chaos, would you like to discuss the big news out of Russia this week?
Navalny, I'm sorry, didn't die.
Now, it would have been like clockwork if he met his demise on Ice Pick Day. You know, it's just like well, Western agent in
But
Russia meets untimely end. Wow, who?
uh, yeah, and on the anniversary of Trotsky's death.
Yep, on Ice Pick Day. That's what I said.
That's right, and I was alluding, and you had the words though. There should be a meme with Stalin in the sky. I'll watch the sky. You watch.
Yeah, and Putin just on the ground with his sunglasses.
Bare chested. Yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah. So Navalny is poisoned yet again, and a lot of Russians are kind of thinking this guy, like, if they really wanted him out, they'd really give him the poison to take him out. And, so which one is it as far as if we're going to talk about Putin? Is he this clever, evil scoundrel that has been outwitting the West for over a decade? Or is he this impulsive idiot who is so evil because he's so impulsive because he's so evil? That he doesn't understand what kind of media backlash and new sanctions will be introduced
yeah,
if he hurts Navalny.
yeah. He
Like
put out a hit on the guy with
I'm,
2% approval. His biggest opposition opponent, not the guys in the Communist Party or the guys in the far right party. It's this one kind of liberal guy who calls himself a nationalist. But you know,
I mean, he's not even that liberal. Like, and the Ukrainians don't like him either.
oh, that's a fucking hilarious story. Pardon my language. Rarely do I get like that on a show as clean cut and prestigious as this, but I have to say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So, yeah, so I'm tempted to think that I don't know, either the CIA basically sacrificed this guy for like getting leverage against Russia to sort of keep the ball rolling with the Western media coverage. I mean, it can't hurt them, right? Or Navalny. How many times has it? I don't know. It's been like a handful of times in the last 10 years where he's been poisoned, and oh my God, what a poor Navalny. Like it's just happened too many times, and again, which one is it? Like uh, the FSB is really effective of killing people even outside of their country, or they keep messing up with Navalny. Well, you know, I'm tempted to think that he's poisoning himself, and this is like, and he messed up.
Ah,
You know,
so he's as melodramatic as a teenage girl who harms himself for attention.
yeah. I mean, all the machinations. I just like it. It makes no sense. It's the same thing as Mossad. Sorry, Mossad. Whoops. Assad gains territory. Conquers 50% of the former province controlled by whatever U.S.-backed jihadis were there, and then after he liberates this area, allows the jihadi families who don't want to be part of Syria to move into jihadi territory further on towards Turkey. He decides for those remnants who decided to stay and were waiting to be liberated, well, he gasses them. It's the same stupid scenario. It's low information, low IQ, high emotive response to these events, and it's just BS.
Yeah, this is pretty much the exact same script as Sergei Skripal, except Skripal was in London and Navalny was, fittingly enough, in Siberia at the time. A Russian dissident in Siberia. We could only be so lucky.
That's right. If we still had gulags, he'd be alive.
But he is alive, as far as we know, and
That's right. Oh yeah, that's right. He's still yeah. Damn it.
yeah. But again, he exists purely to satiate Western media
Yeah.
fantasies. Because
Yes.
again, the second largest party is the Communist Party, led by Zhuganov, who I think describes himself as a Stalinist, and you have Zhirinovsky, head of the third largest party, and just look up Zhirinovsky if you want to have a little bit of a good time if you got some free time. His appearance on Russian primetime television. Now, again, he's been reduced to more of a showman than anything. Sort of a hype man for nationalistic policies. But back in the '90s, let me tell you. But point being is this story compared to Skripal, compared to Litvenko, who actually did die, this completely fell flat. There was outrage for all but 12 hours before the media shut up and moved on to whatever Blumph was doing, or look at how
Yeah,
great
that's
Biden
right.
is with the
Or the DC convention.
yeah, yeah. I was about to say the DNC convention with the occultic ritual, songs on stage or
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
But uh, yeah, that I debated talking about this episode, but I want to wait until it's all over. So we'll probably get to the DNC next weekend. I think the RNC will be
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
by that
Yeah.
point, so we can do like an overview of the presidential politics. But you want to do a Middle Eastern roundup to close out the show?
Sure. I think I had one more thing. Oh, the only other news I wanted to say about Navalny is Germany has requested to take him to a German hospital, and yeah, I know,
Wait,
and
another foreign agent being treated and trained in Germany to overthrow the
yeah,
Russian. Where have I seen this
I
one
know,
before?
yeah, and so okay, so the reason I bring this up is because Navalny's wife, and of course Germany has been barred from taking him, or in the case of his wife, from seeing him. And it's very simple why, because they can plant something there that later comes out that indicts Russia. That Russia, like, they're so angry, stomping mad, and Belarus isn't as big a deal for them as Crimea, like, or Ukraine. Absolutely not. It's big, but it's not as big. Um, and of course, the timing is ridiculous. They would never do that. Navalny doesn't get the crowds the kind that he used to. He's a media pundit, right? He's going to have his loyal following. He's there to criticize Putin. For Putin, he serves an important function. He can, like, it can show to the West, like, well, for Russians anyways, like, for Russians, here is someone who is always opposed to Putin. Like, Putin literally cannot do anything right, and that serves a function. Of course, he makes himself look stupid when it's like Putin's always wrong. Uh, but nonetheless, it gives the idea that in Russia a leader can be criticized. So, anyways, that's all the other Navalny news that I had.
Yeah, and with that, we'll do a brief roundup in the Middle East, starting in Syria, of course. And the big news out of Syria, of course, is it is the 7-year anniversary of the Ghouta gas attack, in which Assad still has yet to pay for, as the State Department Twitter account said. I don't think it was Pompeo. I think it was just a State Department statement in general. Uh, and you recall that was when Syria really reached a turning point, when Assad supposedly used these chemical weapons in 2013. Obama goes before Congress requesting authorization to take military action. Russia decides to step in and give material aid to Assad, and decided to block any UN resolutions that about Syria, about Assad, and that's a couple years before they actually got involved full on with actually deploying troops and giving air support to Syrian forces. But
Right.
to but
And U.S. Congress was against it as well.
yeah, and it was a
I mean,
Republican-controlled
because it was
Congress.
Republican.
Yeah,
Sorry, should yeah.
um, and Obama requested to go in. He was rebuked by Congress, and Syria. That's the day Syria really became, I would say, an international conflict because you had, of course, Saudi money in there. You had Iran send advisors in 2012, but when it really caught the eye of the international community were these supposed gas attacks, which, again, these are the ones where a lot of people will say there's pretty much definitive proof that the rebels did it. But I will say, at the very least, there's no definitive proof that it was the evil Assad regime that did these chemical attacks. But again, I think it's worth mentioning because it's an important anniversary. It's not one many people will remember because with
Mm.
the way the media cycle works. But in hindsight, 2013, late 2013 is when Syria became an international conflict, and just a year later, ISIS would control half the country. Funny how that works out. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it's just a coincidence. But the other more recent news out of Syria is, of course, the usual activity in Idlib, the death of a Russian officer, and the Turkish occupation forces in northern Syria. This is the 3 week mark of when they cut off water access to the locals, which has caused quite a problem. And of course, that's caused a lot of discontent. There hasn't been any major uprisings like we saw in Afrin or northwestern Syria a few weeks back, but those are probably on the horizons if Turkey doesn't, again, free up water, no less. And of course, my new favorite saga out of Syria is the nomad revolution happening in eastern Syria.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, I mean, there's been shelling. I've seen, videos of each forces killing each other. Syria's having a more concerted effort fighting against ISIS and Deir ez-Zor. There's more shelling and fighting in southern Idlib, but we're not seeing any of the massive gains that we saw in the earlier part of the year in February. Um, I don't have anything more than that other than like Hezbollah is not deterred, so Hezbollah is still fighting um, in Syria, despite the massive explosion that we saw in Beirut. You know, whether that was an arms depot, I'm guessing it probably was. It's not deterred them, and it's not going to deter them.
Yeah, and again, now they're really trying the media to pump up that Hezbollah was behind this explosion in
Oh yeah,
Lebanon,
why would they
which,
do?
yeah, which of course, but I mean that pretty much follows along what we said that the finger pointing would begin immediately and it would coincide with the economic deterioration of the country, and it's just a matter of time until somebody has the, I would say, courage or more appropriately foolishness to fire the first shot to spark yet another civil war in Lebanon, because I guess two within the span of like the past 40 years. I guess that's just the right amount. But again, you want to get into that. Like I said,
Yeah, I
Lebanon.
just don't see it happening.
Yeah, but yeah. That's the thing.
I mean,
It.
the whole point of it now is to completely westernize uh, Lebanon in order for Israel to feel safe.
Oh, of course.
Basically, they're going to go through a process where they'll try to stamp out Hezbollah, but they'll try to stamp it out with soft power.
Yeah,
Well,
they'll have to do the soft power
that's going to
because
mean a lot of investment, and we'll see if there's going to be a lot of investment because, like, you'll be able to change their minds, yes, but you'll have to completely transform that country.
oh no,
And I don't see that happening either.
like I said, it's a volatile situation where they will be trying the soft power approach, but I don't know, just based on what I've seen from the situation, they are still just one probably major event away from everyone deciding to start killing each other again. But like I said, how likely that is, I don't know. But again, I think it's more likely than it's been since the conflict started to die down in the 90s. But I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And for the final topic of the show, we will do a brief roundup on Libya. Now, the big news out of Libya is a ceasefire agreement has been reached by both sides. This was called for by France. It was praised by the Arab League. You had the European Union calling for it, and even Turkey. Turkey had an interesting response where they're saying they were going to support their brothers in jihad, yet they still tacitly agreed to the ceasefire agreement.
Yeah, because let's face it, Egypt stood up to them. And I think that alone has impressed the Arab League. And that was something, basically, what Egypt did is something that France had wanted. And it does, I think, represent a kind of, if you believe that this is something the US doesn't want, and I'm kind of likely to, I'm persuaded that that's the case, then it's a move that is going to anger Washington to some degree, because I think they've made their bed with Turkey, more so than you know any other NATO member at this time. You can see that uh, with, yeah, essentially abandoning the Kurds to some degree in Syria.
Oh yeah, I would say so. That they are willing to outsource some of a lot of their policy in the Middle East to Turkey, come to a mutual understanding between the two factions, of course, and they're willing to have them do that in Syria, which, again, as you just said, why they're more reluctant to show more support to the Kurds, and again in Libya, and with Egypt standing up, it wasn't in it wasn't an outside power coming and telling Turkey to stop, such as France, such as Russia, even though they tried that, but a country that is neighbored to Libya telling Turkey to stop. And Egypt,
Hmm.
at least in the modern structure of geopolitics, in terms of where we're supposed to be in this post imperial age, so called, and we're supposed to quote unquote respect the sovereignty of nations, Egypt has much more weight to doing something like that than France or Russia or the United States. Granted, like you said, the United States is probably more tacitly on board, or the European Union. It's just the structure of, I would say, not only the post World War II era but the post Cold War era.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and Erdogan again is trying to gain favor, amongst, I guess, the average Turk or the average devout Muslim Turk. He just turned a sixth century uh, monastery, built the same time the Hagia Sophia was built, into a mosque. So he's on a conversion rampage right now.
Yeah, he definitely wants to rebuild Turkey as this center of Islam and undo about the past 100 years of secularization, and I wouldn't even call it westernization or liberalization, because Turkey was stuck for a while in that phase of the secular nationalism that you would have gotten, for example, after the I would say French Revolution is when like those ideas really started to propagate. But in terms of like the post World War One order, where we don't want to be liberal, but we don't want to stick to the old ways, we want to go our own path. And so, again, Turkey was stuck in that Kemalist phase, and it never advanced to a liberal democracy. I mean, it did briefly, but compared to other countries like ones in southern and eastern Europe, I know maybe not the best comparison. Turkey chose to, in a way, go backwards and return to its roots, and represent itself as the center of Islam. And
Mm.
again, we've seen that with just the conversion of things. Erdogan talking about being like Erdogan talking about jihad in Turkey, as we just saw, and him supporting all these various different groups in Syria. So again, we're seeing the rebuilding of a Islamist Turkey identity, of a, I know again this term gets thrown around a lot, a neo Ottomanism, where they want to be the
Yeah.
successor state to the Ottoman Empire and actually live up to it rather than forsake it, like the Young Turks regime and the other various Turkish nationalists did in the 20th century.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Erdogan rightly saw that Saudi Arabia, I mean, they really haven't been leaders for a very long time. And, of course, having Mecca, they will always have some kind of prominence and have some kind of respect in the Muslim world, assuredly. But as a visible leader of this faith, and even this culture or civilization, Turkey wants to hedge their bets that they are the ones that are best to lead. But we can see with the Arab League that he has not won them over, and and Egypt has been defined.
It's going to be really interesting.
Without Egypt, there would be no peace deal.
Oh, absolutely. But it's
Yeah.
going to be really interesting when we see a bunch of money from the Wahhabist Gulf states flow into a secular military dictatorship like Egypt to combat Turkey. It's going to be a very interesting dynamic.
Mm.
Uh, because, I mean, it's happening already, and as tensions increase, it'll happen even more, but just the shifting of dynamics, these historic rivals coming together to fight again these neo-Ottoman ideas, and Turkey trying to restore itself as the traditional center of Sunni Islam. I I don't know. It's just very interesting to me the way that dynamic is
Hmm.
working out, and I mean
Yeah, well, people respond to this.
yeah, but
Um, yeah, go ahead.
for all we know, they'll be begging Syria to rejoin the Arab League soon enough.
Well, they did recognize them.
Yeah,
Remember, I
yeah,
think it was
they
late
lifted the
last year.
suspension, but like I don't think they've offered them back their full membership.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting watching. I'm not saying it's going to go this far, but there definitely will be some undertones of this. Them trying to reconcile with Syria and be like, oh, hey, you remember that whole civil war thing? Let's forget about that. Look, Turkey, like.
Yeah.
But as you were saying,
No, I agree with you. I was just going to say that people have civilizational feelings. Why is it that in Eastern Ukraine people didn't want to join with whatever was happening in the rest of Ukraine? And that is consistently like that wasn't a one-off. For them to do so, of course, would mean that there would be bloodshed, that they would be targets, that they would be hated, they would be attacked, and it comes at a great cost and danger, and yet they did it. They decided to do it. So it's the same impulse. You go to any region, you go to far Asia, you can find the what is analogous to what we have, say, with Turkey in the Middle East, or what we have with Eastern Europe, or what we have with Western Europe, and so on.
and it's the consequence of living in the real era of the nation state, in the post-imperial era. These countries that are now supposedly sovereign and independent, they feel isolated, they feel alone, they feel the need to be something part
Mhm.
of greater than even just their own nation. And international capitalism, and I know it's a bit dated now ever since the end of the Cold War, and communism, those two things didn't satisfy their hunger for that. And as a consequence, they're seeking these, what I would call civilizational states now.
Yes. Yeah. You see this kind of. I mean, you see even the rhetoric of Poland, saying that we'll help our Belarusian brothers. I mean, it's very cynical. I mean, they basically hate Russia. It's not because they can understand Belarusian speaking. They they basically can't, and but they can understand Czech. And however, so these blocks, yeah, you're right. So these blocks are real. There's a similarity within the languages, and you could bring up World War II. Why did why did the Dutch just let the? There was very little resistance, right? And It's same with Austria. Well, because they believe they belong to something greater. It's a civilizational block that they belong to, right? There's a kinship there.
Yeah, and it's again the outgrowth of nationalism, where nationalism is a transition phase where you're either going to devolve into an atomized uh, internationalist system where nothing really matters. There's no real borders and culture. We're all just individuals united by consumerism, or in the case of like the more communist versions, united by being the workers of the world or whatever. Or it can evolve into again an empire, a civilization where yeah, for the example used, we're Polish. We feel a commonality with the Czechs and the Slovaks. Or we are Germans. We feel a commonality with, of course, the Austrians and the Dutch. And these things, again, it's inevitable because nationalism isn't a sustainable long term position. Not to say nationalism is good, nationalism is bad. It all depends, all in context. But point being is, it's something that will either evolve or devolve.
Yeah.
But I think that covers everything we have to say for now.
Yeah, maybe one more thing. Guys, IMG Black Ops, Call of Duty Black Ops is out, and Yuri Bezmenov is in it.
You know, I'm actually I'm having a lot of trouble getting past the mission where Yuri he tries to take me. He wants to take me out to go pick up Indian women, and like I'm just stuck on that. So if anyone can help me, leave it down below in the comments because I want to go get a brown GF with the Soviet defector. That's all I want.
I know. Like literally, his beef and why he defected is because the Russian Communist Party did not want him race mixing.
Yeah,
So,
and you know
but it did bring up like an interesting point. I plopped by on Anatoly Karlin's thing, but I also posted it myself. Basically saying that like the U.S., all these social developments that happened. If you really believe the Soviets were behind them, like you're an idiot. Like they already started this process. The Frankfurt School is basically it's not really Marxist. It has some Marxist features, but it's a neoliberal think tank.
yeah. I mean,
And
it's actually quite
The Russians didn't want them at all. Okay, number one, they didn't want them. Number two, the Americans brought them in 1935. I think it was Marcuse who joined the OSS that became later the CIA during World War II. Like they collaborated with them. Like anybody who thinks like it's still my multiculturalism, my um, what is it? Marxist
cultural Marxism.
cultural Marxism. Like it's just no, it's not.
Well, it's a funny dynamic because you had the CIA and the American deep state running all these ops on their own population. The KGB and Russian spies in America get clever, thinking, "Oh, look, we can turn the Americans into absolute degenerates, and they'll collapse in under their own weight," like Khrushchev said. But then they realized the CIA was actually, thank you very much for your assistance. We needed that. Like
They,
that was the dynamic that went on there.
absolutely, it literally enhanced their capitalism. They literally found an even better capitalism that would later evolve into the kind of capitalism that we have now, the Ponzi scheme capitalism.
Oh, I like that
Based
term.
on like unbelievable debt, the money, the money machine go burr, and getting everybody in the world hooked on it. They literally have to find new markets all the time, or the thing comes crashing down. And so, like that was part of the degeneracy, right? Because they didn't, big families have to invest, and they can't just make impulsive buys.
Oh, of course.
So, anyways, it's just ridiculous, and of course, the video game is going to blame every single crime against humanity on the Russians. But I also find it funny, right? Because for them to do this, like basically what they're trying to appeal to white American boys, you know, to not only side with America, but hopefully to lure them into joining the services. Like when it's like, trans women are literally guiding drones. Like, it's not what you think it is.
Yeah, it's a last ditch attempt to try to drum up the very masculine, patriotic Cold War America that a lot of people still have nostalgia for. Even people who didn't live through it look back longingly at that time. They're trying to drum that up and again use it for the sake of atomized international transgender capitalism. Pretty much is how I would put it.
Yeah, or it's like what Jazz would say on FTN. It's Finkelfink, right? Like,
Ah ah. Oh
you know what I mean?
yeah
Like, we just got to take care of China, and we got to take care of China and Russia. And then it's like, like you have very, 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 very big internal problems, and this defeating China and Russia is not going to make them go away.
yeah like
It's
that's
only it's literally going to only enhance everything that's happening now. Will only be enhanced if you do it.
yeah and just
It will only
just
embolden and empower it.
just as a final thing because we had the last little unexpected segment which again I have no problem with. That was a little bit of an interesting discussion, but again it's a basket case and yeah it's a basket case. That's all I can say. But that completes a second episode this week of the War Report. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Vile Varangian. Like I said, we'll try to bring him and
Yeah, that
other
was
people
great.
on more often to get other perspectives from those parts of the world. But that wraps up here. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks, guys.